Because even an atheist can read the Bible and say you're skipping certain parts of it.
Right. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Welcome, guys. If you're joining us today in this episode, my name is Pastor Daniel, and I'm going to introduce Pastor Rodney to you guys from
Grace Baptist Church.
Grace Baptist Church here in town in Bakersfield, California, and this is our series, Heart of a Pastor. And these are really casual, as you could probably tell from our t-shirts. I wanted to do in a video format what I do in real life, which is sit in someone's study or sit at Starbucks or sit on a couch and literally just talk ministry and heart and context. And there are a few reasons for that. And one of them is, I think, coming out of COVID, the isolation level for leaders, the discouragement level for leaders was just all-time high, at least statistically, all-time high. And so I realized, man, I need that myself. And then later I realized, man, I think other people could learn a lot and also be encouraged a lot hearing pastors from different churches, whether in the same town or in other towns, realize how much we have the same heart because we have a heart for the gospel. We have a heart for people. And so I am a big, and we've talked about this on this podcast before, I still don't understand competitive church. It's just it's such a weird thing to me. And I mean, I look at it and I guess I see it. I understand, but the motivation of it just baffles me because it's so far from the gospel. And then I significantly desire complementarian or cooperative church. And man, sometimes I feel like I'm wrestling other pastors to help them. Like, man, you said you wanted this, and I'm chasing you down. You said you wanted that, like just come on, this is weird. And anyway, so this is a byproduct of that, desire. And anyway, so you've been at Grace Baptist how long?
15 months.
God, that's so quick.
Yeah,
that's so
very
fast.
quick. And yet sometimes feel like 10 years.
Well, you go through all of the learning stages in that first 15 months of like who's really here, who's on staff, and who are my leaders, and where's the core influencers in this church, and what are they really about? Like what are the sacred cows?
Our church doesn't have any.
No. Okay, well, it's just me. Sorry.
And then what's the future? Who do you lean on and move forward?
And right about the time you learn that there's a change happening, where your leadership is attracting different people, maybe people that were just in the back pew that are beginning to walk forward, maybe people from the outside that are coming in, and it's and this happens everywhere. It's turning some people off, and they're on their way out, and there's not anything you can do about it.
Nope.
I've never seen it work otherwise. I think it's the human nature. So
yes, it is.
Fun times. Married, kids?
So I'm married, just had our 26th anniversary.
Congratulations.
I have 3 children. Thank you. My oldest is 23, and I got a 21-year-old daughter, and then my youngest son is 16.
Where are they all at? Are they all here in Bakersfield?
All moved with us. They
Okay.
were all in college when we moved. And so when they decided to stick with us, and they wanted to kind of get out of Pennsylvania too and start over. So this gave them a chance, and they got a free ride out. So,
That's awesome.
But yeah, they're all around. My daughter works at Youth for Christ.
Okay.
That was brand new. My son he's working at Apple and actually looking hopefully to become a fireman. That's his next step to move to.
Very cool. And then one in high school.
Yep. Starting his senior year this fall.
Awesome.
So
Very cool.
I'm officially getting old.
Yeah. You couldn't tell.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You don't look a day over 29, buddy.
Yeah. Pastors aren't supposed to lie.
And I've talked to enough pastors who've moved from other parts of the country to Bakersfield that it's super unique that if you've kind of grown up in Bakersfield, you're like, man, Bakersfield's weather's terrible, their air's terrible, I got to get out of here, I got to go to those places. And then most people I talk to that come from somewhere else go, man, Bakersfield, pretty nice, I mean, like, and so I feel like your perspective of Bakersfield region weather, amenities, things like that is really dependent on where you've lived.
Yeah. Well, my experience, a lot of people who grew up here think that every place in the world's got to be better than this. When you've been out of it, realize this is relatively normal. Yeah. So it's hot, but then you could be in extreme cold. Other places in the world are hot. But for me, coming right out of the suburbs of Philadelphia, this space is just so open. and it's much nicer. And so it does. And of course, I lived outside the city with smog, so air quality to us, it's different, but it was still bad.
Yeah.
So we just had different diseases there.
Well, the fall winter here is gorgeous.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's gorgeous,
Yep.
and I don't care what anyone says. I mean, people that live here too long, in the middle of the winter, I can't wait for summer. I was like, man, what?
Mm-hmm.
No, this is when we take all the pictures.
Yep.
For the tourism guides, right? This is when we want outsiders to come visit from out of state when we're recruiting them.
Exactly.
We don't want them to come in August or July. I mean, that's terrible.
No, you don't interview staff in the summer. That's
That's a bad idea. No, you'll know what you're getting into. We need some some magic there.
Exactly.
What are you reading right now?
So I've been reading a book I years ago was given it, read about a chapter, and I jumped back into. It's called "In a Pit and a Lion with a Snowy Day." And
in the pit with a lion on a snowy day.
It's come from one phrase of Benaiah in 2 Samuel, and the guy that wrote it. Simply the premise of his boldness to fight. It's not the first lion he had killed. He became the captain of David's guard, and so the book it's built off a willingness to be bold, to not sit back, and wherever you're at, be willing to step out. Maybe make a mistake. So the whole thing really builds off the idea of, are you going to be a lion killer? Are you going to see the battles in front of you as battles, or are you going to see them as opportunities? And so that's been a challenge. When I'm new, I don't want to come in weak.
So that was the guy that David had these 3 mighty men, and he wasn't included in those, but he actually led them.
He did.
Okay, yeah. And he killed a giant Egyptian who was 5 cubits tall, and this is literally in my Bible reading today. That's funny.
No, he serious man. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but it's funny. The guy who wrote the book said, I thought that verse, if I ever write a book, I'm going to use that verse. That's what he said. And then he did. But I love his premise. His premise is simply, today, pastors are not rude, but they need to be bold. They need to be unashamed to step out in faith and see what God will do.
Yeah.
And lead people in boldness.
Absolutely.
The world is so boldly against God. We need people who are boldly for God.
I think that's universal, not just in terms of culture, but in time. I don't know that there is an era where you could say pastors don't need to be bold. Right. We would call it conflict avoidance. The way I describe it to elders around here a lot is like, we all smell smoke, and an elder's job is to run into it.
Right.
Whereas most people go, I'm not, you hear something, you smell something, you see something, there's some discernment of like, something's going on, let's avoid that. We're not conflict avoiders. We're pressing into conflict with gentleness.
Yes.
But man, to avoid conflict is so toxic because it doesn't go away.
No, it's only going to grow. You're going to deal with it at some point. Yeah. So if you deal with it ahead of time, you can even help the people in it navigate them through it. Yeah. And if you're willing to do that, you can save a lot of people and save a lot of pain.
Well, conflict's really good. Healthy conflict's really good. And we did this with staff a while back, years ago. And I remember working with some staff that were really, really burnt out, that had a rough era of ministry, and they were just so toast. And so I remember we were teaching healthy conflict, and they were just like, "Oh, no conflict is good." There's no such thing. And we're like, "Man, I think here you need some time off. I mean, there's some healing that needs to occur. You can I think drive some folks so far that it takes a long time to come back. And church is tough.
Yeah,
ministry is tough, not just for pastors.
Nope.
Someone said the sheep bite. That's what they don't teach you.
That's true.
The sheep bite, like you're a shepherd. Oh, there's sheep. Yeah, but they bite you all the time.
They do. Right? Yeah, and they don't even know why they're doing it. No. They don't think they're doing it.
What the videos sometimes you'll see on like Instagram or Facebook, there's like the little person's walking to go feed it, and the ram comes behind him, just hammers them and blindsides them, and I'm like, oh yeah, ministry.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah. What else are you reading?
So the other book I've been going through is called Fighting Shadows. And some of it's for personal reflection. In the transition from one ministry to another, I've learned that some of the conflicts that came in my last ministry, I'm seeing in my mind, I'm assuming they're going to come back.
Oh.
Some people call it PTSD, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And it's just, how do you process? How do you process good and bad? How are you not convinced? Satan's just trying to convince you these were all your fault. You messed up. Here it comes again. Get out of the ministry. So one guy suggested this book, it's Fighting Shadows. And it really just talks about men hide in the shadows. They don't want to be real with their emotions, real with their battles. So what do? Is they hide in the shadows. Well, then, of course, at some point they blow up, they walk out, or they just stay there. That's where it's comfortable. So the book was kind of challenging and I've been doing a men's class this summer too, trying to use some of the curriculum. But for me, it was just more, what is it in my life that I can be real about? and it's, some people run to be overly emotional. I like that's not the premise of the book. The book is just more of, we have to be real about the fact that men do fight some things and we like to hide it. So for me, how can I lead a church to the next level if I'm not doing that?
Right.
And Satan was using those transition things to really, get me to doubt myself. I tend to be a little more of a people pleaser. And so I've been reading this year read one, Pleasing People, how not to do that, how to pastor without doing that, because that's dangerous, but just being able to process it myself. And I've learned this, if I'm going through it, there's people around me going through it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I learn, then I can help navigate them. And I've already used a lot of the things I've learned in that to help other people. So
that's fun.
Yeah.
So you're 15 months here in Bakersfield. Yeah. What do you see? What does the culture of Bakersfield look like to you comparative to, your exposure in Philadelphia and some of the other places? Like take me through what you see here thus far. And obviously there can be some biases to your neighborhood and your church. And so I get it. But what are you seeing? What do you see in Bakersfield?
Well, the one thing I've seen, especially from where I come from in the Northeast, is the people are very family oriented, much more conservative, not just politically, but in life. I see families together, very family oriented. I come from a place you never saw family together. They would drop kids off. They go to eat. They just never, even in church, the parents would drop kids off, wouldn't stay for church. You just didn't do it. So to see families together, it still takes me a bit to get used to. And then you can invite a whole family over and they'll go that way. But some of that is their entire approach of what they're looking for is different. When you talk about parenting, they're interested. Where I come from, no, I don't want to learn that stuff.
Interesting.
And my kids do it. My school does it. I'll put them in the Christian school. They'll solve it. And so a lot of it is the church was supposed to solve the problems here. People are looking for answers.
Yeah.
Because they want to be able to solve it. And I've noticed that to be a big difference.
Yeah.
And one of the things I noticed here, of course, the 4 quarters of Bakersfield are very, very different.
They are.
And that, where I was from, everybody was, you had your cities, but generally combined.
Right.
So I'm learning that when you cross a certain border, the city changes.
A little bit. Yeah.
But not massive. But I appreciate, we're in the northwest corner, kind of way up there.
Right.
But yet our church talks a lot about trying to reach out to other places.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate the fact that we're not isolationists. That's a big deal, because when we talk about ministry, how do we reach out? How do we do this? And so that's what I'm used to, is like that part of the town you stay away from, those people or whatever. And some of it was, of course, Northeast, they didn't speak your language. They're coming from different countries. So that one area of town only spoke Korean or only spoke Chinese. And so you don't go in there because you don't speak their language.
Right.
So that's been a little different. It's a family-oriented aspect. They're interested. And I love the fact they're seeking truth. That's the big thing here I've learned is someone will ask you a question and you'll answer and you can have a great conversation with them. So that part is intriguing to me. I won't say it's easier because there's a million churches around here. And so they'll bounce around. But at the same case, I'm good with that. I think we're all on the same team.
Yeah. And I would tell you, even with the number of churches, we ran demographics around our area, and there are not many churched people.
No.
So a lot of churches, a lot of them are empty.
Yeah,
or close to empty. And so some background for Bakersfield, you may have heard through the 15 months here or so. But the 2 big things that have occurred for Bakersfield, the Dust Bowl, that whole movement from Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Bakersfield's oftentimes referred to in jest as the westernmost town in Oklahoma because of all of the Okies that moved over here. So the Grapes of Wrath is written about all of this area, right? And if you're reading the Grapes of Wrath, you're reading about Bakersfield and Delano and Fresno. And I mean, this is the pocket. And so that plus oil means we have a huge Texas, Oklahoma influence here. You could see it, right? With the horses and the ag and the oil and the refineries and the stuff. And then the growing, so Hispanics became the majority ethnicity 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And so the Hispanic influence, which is that sort of quasi-cultural Catholic influence, gives you between the two, Texas, Oklahoma, and Hispanic Catholic influence, you get the heavy family-oriented neighborhood. I mean, almost everywhere, right? Whether you're in a Hispanic neighborhood or not, the family thing is a big deal.
It is.
Here, kids is a big deal. And then because of the liberalism of California, there's this weird hybrid mix now. This next generation has come up unchurched, is searching for, I saw this the other day, great quote, love it, going to use it. I wrote it up on the board. It says, Gallup did a poll just looking at all of the U.S. and particularly the unchurched, and it was a huge number. It's like 71% of people say they are looking for ancient truths that are applicable on Monday. I like that.
That is good.
Ancient truths that are applicable on Monday. And I was like, ooh.
Wow.
Why? Because they're everyone's suspicious and almost fatigued from the next new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, there've been so many next new things, blah, 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 like this, and we're just going like, there's got to be something that has stood the test of time. And so if you're 22, 25, 27, 32, you've come through this, there's always something new, and you're going, you know what? Those aren't working out.
Nah.
But these short-term new fad things are not working out. I need something that has been around a while. Historically, like convictional has been around. And then secondly, it can't be empty. It can't, that flighty, theoretical 50,000 foot view.
Right.
It's got to help me.
Yeah.
Because I got real problems.
Yep.
And if you find the blend, which that's what the gospel informs, right? That's what the gospel speaks to. Then we have a way forward.
Yeah.
And that's applicable. Northwest, Northeast,
exactly.
Southeast, it doesn't matter.
And I've seen that truth transcends all those differences.
Yes.
And I'm finding it in our church where people have been coming from all different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And some of it catches online, some of it they've been invited, but they come back because it's like, it was truth. It was relatable. Mm-hmm. I can use it. It's not just information. And that's what I've learned. And I, grew up a little, different depending what circle you're in, but I've come back to the point of you just teach the Bible, but teach it practical. Don't just tell people what's being said. Don't just show them you have an education. What does it mean? How do I apply it tomorrow? But I think people are attracted to that.
Yeah.
And they're looking for it. And someone not necessarily trying to be political, but have truth for today.
Yeah. And
I think that's a difference. We're not driven by the culture telling us what to preach, because the Bible is very culturally relevant.
One of the things you were talking about is this conviction or belief that we needed to return to Bible teaching or more, I guess, biblically centered teaching. And when you said that, it made me think, like, I wanted to ask you a question, which was, what are we returning from?
Okay. Well, I've grown, some of it's where I grew up.
Yeah.
It's different because in where I grew up, my dad was very different than this. My dad was very Bible-centered, very centered. But a lot of, and I'm seeing this in a lot of churches, they run to topics. So the conservative churches just ran to topical preaching.
Okay.
The downside of that is you're basing it off the opinion of the pastor comes up with how many topics. And so you're going to repeat them multiple times. They use one verse. There's not a lot of depth. So while I've been given some great truth from the preacher, I have no Bible depth to do with it. So I've got a lot of facts, but I have no depth as a person. How do I get that? I got it on Sunday, but how do I dig down? So there's topics, and usually, and the downside of that is it allows you to run off context. I can use one verse out of context to make my point. I can push my position and make a preference doctrine instead of letting the Bible set it. So to me, and then you go to the other church where they're the old phrase is seeker friendly. I don't want to deal with sin. I don't want to deal with this because I'm going to offend somebody. Well, then people are beginning to realize you're missing something, because even an atheist can read the Bible and say you're skipping certain parts of it.
Right.
So to me, it was a big push when I was out of college coming through. They call it expositional. Just teach the Word of God. Don't try to find 30 topics and impress people.
Right.
Go through a book and let God choose the topics. And I've learned, I've covered things I never thought I would. But then people come to me, you answer this, and I don't remember teaching on that.
Right.
But other thing I like is it also teaches people how they can read that same passage.
How to dig.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's somewhat missing today when you just give a bunch of topics and everybody, because I used to get texts all the time. What's the answer to this? And I love that, but I really want to teach somebody, hey, go to the Bible, find this.
Right.
And I think that's what's missing a little bit. And that's why sometimes when you start trying to apply it to culture, they don't know what to do because they've never been taught how to interpret or the basics. And I think that it starts in the pulpit. If you get back to truth, how you got there, what does it mean? What did it mean when it was written? How does it apply to today? I think people find it's easier than they think it is, and it really attracts them to want to do more.
Yeah.
And I found that to be true.
So we have an interesting blend here. What we do is we're always going through a book of the Bible. And then when we do topics, we just pause where we're at in the book, go do a topic for a while, and then pick up where we left off.
That's
and
good,
so we went through Ephesians. It took us over a year to get through Ephesians, which isn't even a long book.
No,
Some of it we went really slow. There's Ephesians 4:1 is like, nope, that's the whole sermon. Ephesians 4:1. I mean, that's a big verse. Like, we're going to have to sit there for a minute. And Ephesians 4:2 and 3, that's a whole nother sermon. Like, and then other parts you could go a little bit more. We're in John right now, which is a long book. Yeah, so that's probably going to take us 3 years to get through, depending on how slow we go in certain chunks. But we're maybe closing in on the halfway point of John. Right. But we're in a topical fall where we have a lot of new believers. So we're covering, like, why do we read the Bible? What's the Bible? I mean, we're just 2 weeks on the Word of God because I don't I don't think they know.
Right.
We're going to do parenting. We're going to do skeptical. We have a whole skeptical series on the questions. And then, we'll go back to John.
Yeah.
We'll pick it up on, John 7 or 8 or whatever, and just keep plugging our way through it. And so it's been a good tension. In Keller's book on preaching, he talks a little bit about the need for expository preaching through verse by verse through the Bible, and the need for topics, and the preacher's job or the elder's job, depending on how you come to this, of managing the tension between these two. Because if you only do one, here's going to be the weakness. If you only do topical preaching, guess what happens in your church? If you only go through Isaiah for the next 4 years, here's going to be, and I loved it. I thought, I love seeing things as tensions. Yeah. Because tensions are not problems. Problems you solve. Tensions you're just constantly managing. Yeah. Right? Like, a little more of that, a little more, and I think that's so human. Like, the reality of life is that most of the time we're not solving problems. Right. We're managing tensions. And so I enjoy that. What we did have to do for us is I felt conviction to do is we wrote out like the 17 rules of preaching and res. And so we have some definitive rules. If you're going to come up through our teaching team, if you're going to guest preach, we're sending that to you ahead of time. Hey, do you agree with all these things before you come? And there are things like you always have to have an anchor text, a passage that you're going, like if you can't exegete that passage as the center of what you're doing, it's probably not for us. Right. Again, the safeguards, right? I think when I hear Bible teaching as when I think about what we're coming from, not necessarily this church, but in general, the eras of evangelicalism, I think that where we missed is we would teach the text and then we would avoid the hard application. So they taught text faithfully. Like I would say, they taught it. I mean, they're not misinterpreting the Bible necessarily. It's we'll avoid the sensitive topics. Right. And so here's the topics we'll talk about. We'll talk about partying. We'll talk about sexual sin. We'll talk about homosexuality. We'll talk about sex before marriage. We'll talk about the things that we think you're actually not dealing with, right? That the world's dealing with. So I don't even know who you're preaching to, right? Right. Outsiders that aren't even watching. And but man, we're not going to spend a lot of time on gossip. Not going to spend a lot of time on slander. We're not going to spend a lot of time on ongoing repentance, confession, vulnerability, the things you really are going to make you uncomfortable and stir in your seat. Like, ooh, what, we're not going to do that. Right. And so it's created a weird void of older congregation in a lot of churches aren't even, if you went in and did that, there would be almost an offense. Yes. You almost have to start slowly because it would be such a shock of like, what? Yeah. What? Or they say, what's wrong with the pastor today? Yeah. Why is he so mad? and you're not even mad. Like, there's not even anger. You're just, I had someone say, so I use two examples all the time when I talk about what you're consuming. And so I talk a lot about, you got to stay off network news. It's actually now built around an algorithm to make you angry because you'll watch longer if you're angry. And so if you're watching MSNBC or CNN or Fox News, they're trying to make you angry. And I'll say those 2 or 3 every time. And I'll have people go, why do you keep getting mad at Fox News? And I go, I used 3 examples. Exactly. Why'd you pick that one? Yeah. And again, it's because like, man, you're getting into my life. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's what the Bible is supposed to do. It's supposed to get in your life, right? And change things, right? That's fun. That's actually a lot of fun. Yeah. So I'm not a people pleaser. I'm a contrarian, which gets me in a whole different bucket of problems, right? So it's good to have people around me that if I begin to become ungentle, go, hey, I don't know that you were as gentle as you could have been. It's like, oh, okay, that again. I put people around me that look at me. Nope, go. Right. So I have meetings before meetings to make sure we know where we're going. I will say ministry's beating a little bit of that out of me because some of it, especially people pleasing, comes down to pride if you're not careful. Yeah. I don't want to upset people because of me. Oh. So at that point, you do have to. Now, the benefit for me is, am I doing this for the wrong reason? Okay. So I do focus more attention on making sure that every decision I'm making is good. And then at that case, if I really believe this is where we're going, okay, we're just going to move forward and try to. And I will say the teaching has helped because when we just finished Ephesians. When you're teaching through things, I dealt with stuff that I never thought I would that fit right where our church is at the moment. And so now I'm able just to build on that
in practical every day, referring back to it. And we're moving to a topical series for the next couple of weeks, preparing for the fall as we're trying to develop outreach and change some ministry. So, and then we're going to jump back in. I think we're going to the book of Esther. But
that's a good book.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's taking a little more research, but I'm looking forward to it. But that's what I enjoy about that. And the key to me is not just teach the Bible, but how is it practical? How is it relevant?
Yes.
Because I believe the Bible is relevant. I mean, we kill it.
Every part of it.
Yeah.
We're in a Bible in the year. So we started in January 1st, started Bible in a Year plan with Nicky Gumbel. I don't know if you've ever done that one before. You'd love it. He is the guy who started the Alpha ministry in the UK, the prison ministry. So first of all, he has an accent, which makes him sound way smarter.
Yes, it does.
Right. So I'm like, he's clearly smart. Listen to this accent. But he is brilliant. And the church committed to do it. So we got like hundreds of people now still reading through the Bible every day. And there are little moments where you hear something go, wow, I didn't even know that was in there. And I know I've read this multiple, I've been through this plan multiple times, and I'm still like, well, that's really cool. I agree. And so what would you say about this? You grew up in the church. I grew up in the church. 1994, 2004, 2024. I mean, like jumping 10, 20 years, 30 years as we come. What do you think is changing? About doing ministry, being a pastor, being a church, doing ministry? Like what is so fundamentally different 30 years later?
All right. Well, I graduated high school in 94. Went to college. And so I was trained under the 90s thinking. One of the things that I've learned, well, first of all, I would say that in those days, and it was effective, programs were a big deal. Not that I think programs are bad, but what they kind of, it was easy to skip discipleship for programs. The program should be doing the discipleship. And so intentional one-on-one discipleship disappeared. And I think in today's day and age, that's something that is sought after.
Yes.
And so programs solved it, but then you're finding that churches are dying because they're running programs. Because they have programs, they realize no one's going to it, but they have programs. And they don't realize they're dying because, hey, there's 50 kids back there. No, there's 3 back there, but we have a program. So, and I think that was something that was a big deal, because we were taught how to do programs, how to use these through each. And what happened was everything was focused in the church. Get people, and people would come to church just to curiosity back in the 90s. And they would show up. And so you could do that. But in today's day and age, I think technology's changed that. Because they have access to all of this. They didn't have access to that in the 90s. So now they know what they're getting into before they get to you.
It's true.
But more than that, they have so many voices. What's the truth? And they're not concerned about your opinion. They're concerned about what the Bible says. So if you're spending a lot of time telling people what you think, my kids tell me this all the time. I have no time for that. They catch on to it real quickly when the person's either arguing or got their own opinion. They just have no time for that.
Right.
So I think that some of it, I think one of the things that church has done in the last 30 years, valid. People talk about church hurt, and you got your opinions on it. But I think there's some validity behind it. And I think the idea that the church should just be trusted because of the church is no longer that way today.
I would 100% agree.
And I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it's our responsibility to earn that trust as pastors, as church, and to gain it, to reach out, but also to teach the generation that grew up in the 90s how to love in those people who didn't grow up in church. That's different. Because I grew up, everybody was, they looked like church. They were saved, discipled, but quickly you started looking and dressing like church. Where in today's day and age, people are walking in and like, you accept me as I am. And it's good. Because I think it offers a real nature. So I think the big difference I've noticed is we run from programs to relationships. And it's not just come on our campus, we have that. How do we use our campus to love you? But how do we go out to you and love you? And I think that, used to be you can just go, maybe preach in a street corner, knock on a door, and those things can be somewhat effective. But generally, if you really want to have fruit that remains, you got to find a way to connect with them, relationship, answer the questions. I think the big thing is today we have to be more willing to answer the questions that sometimes the church just never touched. They would say it was political. And the problem is, in my opinion, the world takes sin, they add a political pin to it, we can't talk about it anymore.
Right.
And I'm so anti-political from the church pulpit. But if the Bible says it, I'm not going to ignore a comment because of it. So, but it's not even scream against it. It's how do you navigate the questions? I get up and I've asked our church questions about some of the cultural things today, and I've scared the daylights out of some people. They didn't even know the questions existed. And they're like, what do I do with that? I'm like, well, that's the whole premise. I asked the question. Let's answer it. So I think that's part of it in today's culture is I think that at least I ask my kids and I talk to the younger people coming in, they're looking for 2 things. They're not just looking for program, for purpose and for truth. They want to be able to answer. They're no longer living off what their grandparents used to do or their parents used to do. Some of it is their parents just walked out of church.
Yeah.
A large portion of my generation just said, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
So they're looking for, okay, how is your truth better than that truth? And is it really truth? And so I think that's one of the major things. And part of that is social media, because you can get answers from anybody. And some of the answers are so crazy, but people are buying it.
Right.
And I like that. I love the fact that there's more out there, because it drives, I love skeptics. I think if you're seeking truth, you're going to find it. And I think God is truth. Jesus is truth. So if you're really seeking truth and you're honest about it, you're going to be able to see through a lot of the junk out there.
Yeah.
And so if someone's just speaking truth relevantly, it's just going to attract. The light attracts people.
Well, I think what you're describing is, I would have maybe articulated it differently, but it's the same concept as the default and majority worldview has changed.
Yeah.
In evangelical terms, we would call this post-Christendom.
Yeah.
There's no longer a Christian framework. There's no longer a net positive view of church and Christianity and Christians. In fact, the net view now of Christians is very negative.
Yeah.
And so the moment you say Christian, right, they kind of lower the view. We got a lot of stigma around that. Earned or unearned just is. This is the reality we're living in. And so programs really were all built on the concept that the society and culture that we lived in had a pretty positive view of church. And so we could offer a program. Well, the church is good. The pastor is a moral authority, and so those positive viewpoints, positive worldview, let us get away with lots of stuff. Like, hey, we're just going to offer it. And people are like, oh, okay, well, it's the church, it's the pastor, Now it's the opposite.
Yeah.
You say you're a pastor, there's a lower view. There's a skeptical view, almost a suspicious view of being a moral authority. Oh, you're probably a bigot. You're probably this. You're going like, whoa, where did all that come from? That's the culture. Yeah. And so methodology had to change to go into a dark culture and address it. And I think where we've struggled is, in general, as humans, we don't like change. The older we get, the less we like change.
Right.
The older we get, the more our cognitive function begins to decline. It's just the reality, right? And change requires way more bandwidth. And so when we walked into a merger at this church 6.5 years ago, there were so many programs. Their accounting system had fund accounts for each program, and there were like 54 fund accounts. I mean, there were programs with 2 people.
Right.
And we remember looking at this Denny's menu of programs and just going like, are there people in there? And it was no. And so, that's a big, it's a big shift. What you're describing is, I think you called it real. And so the word we use, and we have it all in our documents and everything, is authentic. Yeah. It's authenticity. And I think that you were mentioning tech, and this is the second part I see in the culture that matches what you're saying, is because of social media, our culture is used to people living 2 lives, the social media life and then the real life, and which has created all kinds of depression. By the way. I mean, oh my gosh, the mental health side of this is terrible. And so we've really been on a path now for a few years of being exactly the same people behind the pulpit, in public, in private, one-on-one. There's no difference in how I would speak and how I would treat you and what I would say and what I'm willing to. And so to do that, I think because of the natural suspiciousness of the culture, I have to be overtly vulnerable. Yeah. I have to open up and be so confessional from the pulpit that it's uncomfortable. And I mean, even like, my dad was just like, "Yo, you're sharing," and I was like, "I think you have to."
Well, I remember when I was a youth pastor, I was trying to reach a young family, and I asked one of the brothers, I'm like, "What am I missing?" He's like, "Well, you pretend like you've got it all figured out." I'm like, "No, I don't." He goes, "Well, you never admit wrong."
There you go.
It's not that you say you've got it figured out, but you never say that what you're preaching on you need. And I'm saying, well, half of my research and study was in because, but you don't tell us that. And I thought, and honestly, the moment that changed my perspective, and it is, the line, like I had a men's class Sunday, and we definitely jumped into lines I probably wouldn't do online. But it opened up a conversation piece in that room of men that they didn't want to leave the conversation. Right. And it was men like, we can actually talk about this stuff.
Yes.
They've been in church forever. Like, we're allowed to talk about this. Yeah. But it had to start with me being honest with the fact that, listen, and granted, I will admit, there was a time if you admitted wrong, they might fire you. Yeah. There was a point of that in truth. And
yes. No, that is a real thing in evangelical circles. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then there's some things that disqualify you from ministry.
Well, if you're already struggling with those, you're disqualified whether you admit them or not, right?
Exactly.
I mean, like the problem is the private life has to be there has to be some integrity there.
Yes,
There can be struggle, but there's got to be some integrity too.
But I think we've gone so to hide that. What happens is when you hide that, you can live a certain way. Then you think you're okay. You're not caught. And I think that throws pastors into some dangerous places because if they think they're moral, they can have these separate lives.
Yeah.
And that's why we're seeing it just recently, men walking out of ministry. And some of it is their position, but you have this separate life. And, I think
the question I've asked of people more than once, because, you have to keep asking it is, can you tell me the last time you confessed sin to another believer, like another person?
Right.
Like where you sat down and go, man, bleh, right? Not confess to God. You should. The Bible also talks about confessing our sins to one another.
Mm-hmm.
When's the last time that happened? When's the last time you were really seeking real repentance? Because if it was in 1982 when you accepted Christ, it's been a minute.
Yes, it has.
And I don't know. Here's the I want to be careful here. To be a Christian, to love Jesus, the Holy Spirit is going to continue to find those areas of my life and convict me. So if there is no conviction, or if I've gotten so good at tamping down on conviction and not confessing and repenting for 5, 7, 10, 15 years, I don't know that you can grow. And at some point, I would even say, man, if you, there's a point where if you've never produced spiritual fruit, the Holy Spirit's never produced spiritual fruit, I would have hard questions about whether you know him.
And I think Christianity, if we're not careful, churches, you can act and you can put on the front and never be saved. It's either not saved or you're right. These are vulnerable steps. And, it used to be if you acted and dressed a certain way, you look Christian and your discipleship ended right there. And now, and I love the fact that when the younger generation gets here, we'll start talking about this. They jump on board.
Yes.
They love it.
Yeah.
The older generation's like, are you allowed to talk about that?
Right.
Years ago, I was in a public school doing a Bible study, and the ROTC leader that was running it, he made a good point to me. And at first, I disagreed with him because I was trained to, but he made a good point. He goes, the world is unashamedly screaming their perspective at these kids, and the Christians are unwilling to be as bold in the other answer.
Yes.
So no wonder they're walking away from it.
Yes.
And when I hit that, I'm like, and I battled that a little bit. I'm like, well, okay, I don't have to be as harsh as the world, but there is truth. And the answer is not fight all these other, because these things are going to change from day to day. What's on the news is changing tomorrow.
Right.
But the truth is what stays.
Yes.
And that vulnerability is a huge thing.
Yes.
And I'm learning that, that when you're willing to do that in the teaching, in the preaching, just being real. And like I told my church the other day, not confessing my sin. You don't need to know that, but to realize that I do have sin and these are real. And I've had people who've come from non-church backgrounds and they're staying. They're like, it's real.
It's real.
And one guy told me, he goes, well, you're not perfect, so I can stay here. I thought, I didn't, that's not the way it used to be, right? You're supposed to be perfect.
No.
But they know you're not. And they've heard so many people fall. Most of them are falling because they're hiding behind a fake facade.
Yeah.
And that's why Paul told us, Paul told Timothy, take heed unto yourself, then to the doctrine.
Right.
First yourself.
Yes.
And if you fall, then the doctrine loses because you failed.
You failed.
So that's something that I heard that in college, and that stuck with me for a long time.
So where I would tell you that is just the perfect example, and we've had to talk about it here, is how the church handled sex.
Yeah.
Growing up, in the midst of the purity culture and the movements and all this stuff, there was such a taboo around sex that it became, other than maybe here and there talking about the dangers and evil of premarital sex, it was silence.
Right.
And so one of two things happened for most of our youth. It happened for me. Either we believed that sex was evil because of the way it was being treated. And if that happened, that was actually really dangerous.
Yes.
And the reason that was dangerous is then those kids got married and thought sex was evil. And now their marriage is very dysfunctional because they're like, this is evil.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Or they didn't believe us. That was me. I didn't believe us. And we're like, I'm going to go get answers.
Right.
You're not answering this. And your answers sound wrong.
Right.
And I'm suspicious of them. They don't seem to hold up. And so I'll go find answers. And here's the thing. It was not great in the 90s to find answers, but think about now with phones and you can find answers like that if you have questions. And so we can't remain silent
No.
because they will go get answers and they will be the wrong answers.
Exactly.
So we have very awkward conversations in our
Mhm.
church, right? From the pulpit. Like we did a sex in the gospel. And this is not the first time. It won't be the last time we talk about sex in the gospel. Like, yo, we're going to get into this and you're going to be uncomfortable and you need to be.
Right.
Like it's by the grace of God, our church has received that very well. Maybe not the first time, but the last time, like
Right.
as we've grown together
Right.
and stuff.
Yeah, and exactly it. I think when they learn that the pastor's authentic, they're not just trying to be crazy. They're not just trying to look at clicks. They honestly want to share truth.
Yeah.
The more you show the authenticity and prove that, people are willing to follow. Time helps with that.
Yeah.
And as I'm saying, 15 months, I'm not fully to where you are yet. And
I've had a little more runway.
Yeah. So I get telling my wife, I say, she goes, well, what's your plan? I'm like, well, the first one's 5 years. When I got here, it was 2.
Okay.
Now it's 5.
Well, I'm not going to wish this on you, but tragedy and trial accelerate that sometimes.
Well, it has. We inherited a relatively large staff, and I only have one of those still on staff.
Yes.
And God swapped. And it's not bad. It wasn't always a negative thing. One of them was fired before I got there. The other one left right after. And I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. It's God's transition.
It is.
But one thing, a preacher told me years ago, if we force this stuff, we wonder why it's frustrating. He goes, it's got to be organic. Let God do it.
Yeah.
So, and we're a year and a half into it, and I'll meet with her today. She's the last one on staff that was on staff when I got there.
It's crazy.
And that's like 7 people or 6 people.
Gosh.
But God has already had people in place ready to take those spots. So I gotten less concerned about trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so God's, I have a 5-year plan because I don't want to overwhelm or, get people just to walk out for no reason. But God's like, we're going to push us along a little bit. So sometimes he's telling me I'm going too slow.
Well, and I've had both. I've been maybe too fast, maybe too slow. The benefit I had is with the mass exodus post merger and COVID and election, and then the senior pastor leaving, I stuck around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of the trust that I finally got from the church was just being the guy that stuck it out.
Yeah.
And there were a few of us that were like, no, we're going to stay through all this hard stuff and we're going to walk with you guys. We're not going. And so I think it took all of that to finally get some people go, well, listen, you can say a lot of things about him, but he's still here,
Right.
And so that probably was the biggest single thing.
Well, in our first year, I was surprised. We got nailed with just a couple, and I wasn't surprised by what it was. And from my experience in ministry, it wasn't overly heavy, but our elders were surprised. They're like, we've never seen this. I'm like, well, either you just weren't showing it or, because the other guy was there so long, 17 years, he started the church and he did a great job. But I'm like, the new guy's going to get this.
Oh, yeah.
So don't be surprised by it. But at one point, they had a special meeting like, are you quitting? It's just like they're afraid I'm going to walk away because of it. I'm like, no. This is 23, at that time, 23 years ministry. This is normal.
This happens.
This is, and they're like, oh. But the one thing that did help was when I got there, they don't know who I am.
No.
So when you walk through these things, and God gives you an opportunity to walk through it calmly, maturely. In fact, at one point, I'm sitting with some guys. I'm like, whoa, we need to stop. All right, let's just stop. All right, first of all, let's be the adults. Let's relax.
Yeah.
God's not afraid of this. And so it allows us to have conversations that even though I'm younger than some people in the room, the experience and God's gift.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and I was reading through it shortly after one of these things happening, and Paul told Timothy, endure hardness. Are you really surprised by this?
Right.
This is on purpose. So get over yourself and move on. That's how he told it to me.
Yeah. That's how I read it in my
that's pretty much how it was. That's how I would have said it.
Rodney Standard Translation.
Yeah. Kick in the head, pretty much.
Well, and I think you got to be forged in the fire of ministry, so that looks different. Of course, we all want it to be comfortable. That's our human nature. I love it to be comfortable, and the trials are hard. The conflict is difficult, and yet you get to see God's grace in the midst of those things.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a beauty in watching God's grace in difficult moments. And so even in tragedy and in grief, like that's the beauty of the gospel. And we stumbled upon this podcast that ended up getting turned into a book called You're Not Crazy years ago. And it's gospel sanity for young pastors. And it was just revolutionary for us. And it really introduced a concept I've never heard, but I'd always had a conviction for, which was gospel culture.
Right.
And gospel culture is where what it feels like when you walk in the building is perfectly in line with what you would state in your written values.
Exactly.
And I went, yes, because it is the hypocrisy of the church that said, man, Christ is all of these gentle, loving things, and then wasn't gentle and loving. And you went, well, if he is, why aren't you?
Right.
And I think the mass exodus from the church in our younger generations, in fact, there's some studies on this, is that, hey, we walked away because our parents don't even live the way they claim at church they live.
Right.
And so why would we?
Yep.
And so having this sort of perfect alignment between the orthodoxy and orthopraxy is like, yes, how can I do that?
Yeah.
Now, the path there is really hard.
It is. And it's the balance. You're constantly pulling back and forth.
Yes.
And some days you're going to go too far. But I'd rather try something and it doesn't work and just take ownership of it than just sit back. Because to me, the alternative is going back to tradition.
Right.
You know? And that's not working.
No.
And I think what we miss is the gospel's there. We're so busy doing church that we miss that the church is no longer fulfilling the Great Commission. So that's what, are we doing this? If we're not, we're not going to change our doctrine. The core never changes. But how we approach it should.
Absolutely.
You know, I read an article by a preacher friend of mine who took a church, and he asked his friend why he wasn't inviting coworkers to church. And he goes, our church is crazy. Because it was old, the way they dressed. He goes, I don't want my friends to know I'm coming here. They wouldn't know how to handle it. I grew up here.
Yeah.
And he put that out there as your church people think this. And I look back and I'm like, they're right.
Yeah.
If an unsaved person walked into our world, they thought they went back to the 1970s. And it really made me rethink, how are we approaching, and not just for the unsaved, but for the saved? How are we teaching them to be relevant to the world? Because you can come to church similar just to religion. I do my Sunday, then on Monday I'm different. And it's just not, it's not authentic. No. And that's something I think is necessary today. Yeah. And it's good.
Well, and in line with that, so when we begin to look at methodology that would align with what you're talking about, I realized, man, the power of the kitchen table, the power of your home, opening your home, your mess. It's not going to be perfect. Like every wife flips out, or it's not all clean. Like, they're not going to check the closets, honey.
Yeah, exactly.
Opening up your life
right.
to those people is so much different. In the programmatic phase, we got used to hosting everything in a classroom at a church. But now I'm like, no, man, I want you to open your home. I want them to sit at your counter, your kitchen table. I want you to do life with them. Open the Bible and your life there, not in a classroom. And that's a shift again. But it's more aligned with this idea of being real, being genuine, being authentic, being vulnerable is like kitchen tables. And by the way, hospitality, prerequisite to be an elder,
it's a good
prerequisite
point.
To be a deacon, commanded of all Christians. I mean, it's a thing.
Yeah, it's only in Scripture.
Oh so, we can ignore
exactly.
it. Yeah. What 15 months in, what do you love about your church?
Well, when I took the church, it was a little bit older, and they knew that coming in, but they have a great desire to change that.
Okay.
And so they love people. I mean, when I hear people say that, you hear friendly churches, which means they're just friendly to each other, and they don't want new people in. But generally speaking, our crew loves new people.
Love it.
When they come in, one guy made a comment to me the other day. He's new to our church. He goes, you greeted me 6 times before I walked through that church auditorium door. I'm okay, good. Praise the Lord. So that is built in, I'm guessing, by the last guy, and our church loves it. So generally speaking, when I'm throwing out new ideas, now, if I forget to do something the old guy did, they're going to point that out. But new ideas they love. And so that to me is they're excited about the new. They're excited about getting engaged. The one thing we're working on is getting the younger people engaged and helping them to realize what's some of the limitations. But our church wants that. Yeah. So what we're teaching is helpful because they're not mad about it. At first they're like, I don't think so. All right, take a few weeks and think about it. And then they're coming back. You're right, I see that. So some of it is graciously pointing out things that they don't even realize they're doing. And I need the same thing.
Sure.
I have people who help me do that. You're doing this. So that's all part of accountability. It's all part of pointing out. And that's been it. But most occasions I hear pastors all the time, they've been there 5 years and they're still trying to teach that one basic or that second basic. And we've transcended a lot of these things. So as we look to the fall, we're moving in and a lot of the people are like, who cares what the last guy did? What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing now? So that's exciting.
That is very, though, that's worthy of honor that, the last pastor really left the church in a state that was like sweet.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, loving. Yeah. And that doesn't always happen.
No, usually. And he made a big point to how to treat me when he came in. And some of it went, a little too far. We're trying to keep away from business. I'm like, no, I need to be in it. But honestly, their desire to protect me.
Yeah.
I mean, from the staff to the part-timers to the elders to the new deacons we're putting in, They're all about let us do this. And then you stay. And this is rare. I mean, I grew up, the pastor did everything. And in this situation, the only frustration I have sometimes is I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, if you had just asked me, but that's fine. But again, people say ministry is messy. Yes, it is. And that's okay. If you think it's not going to be, you're not in a growing ministry.
Not at all.
So to me, that's been helpful to them is they just really want me to be able to focus on preaching and teaching and loving people. So they go out of their way to make that possible.
What's the thing you're working on? What's the initiative, this momentum or direction that, over the course of the next 12 months you see kind of happening?
Well, we've been starting that already. After my first year, I sat down with the elders. Okay, what do you think? And part of it was, how do we reach young people? How do we keep people?
Yeah.
And I think the big thing was, and this is not even we chose not to do this. If you're not intentional on discipleship and mentorship, you won't do it. Yeah. You don't, and you've got programs, you've got stuff. So I just sat down, I'm like, it's not even a program base, it's more structure. How do you get the person who comes in brand new to years from now be an elder? How do you train that? So we're developing a program, I don't call it a structure, to disciple, to mentor. And part of it is some of the older people, I get it. They're afraid we're kicking them out. You focus on new people. You forget that everything's here because of the older people. Right. So my goal is to make it a multi-generational church as well, but while letting the older people invest into the younger people. And it's a training. The goal is don't just get out of the way, let the young kid come in. Yeah. Because there's so much you can teach that person.
So format-wise, what does that look like? Is it a one-on-one thing? Is it real small, intimate settings?
So it starts off, well, depends on where you're at. At first, when you want some training, some of it's going to be classes. Okay, we're going to have a class on teaching, class on preaching, class on how to disciple, class on on Bible study. So sometimes it just mean classes. Yeah. So more people can be engaged in it. As we start going up, all right, you might be a deacon, you might be running a ministry. Now we have one-on-one and there's mentorship time. So I'm taking a leader who's going to step down. They're going to mentor somebody through what does this look like? What do we believe? All those things. So as they get higher in leadership, the groups get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then when you get to elder, you're dealing with at least one other elder. You're dealing with me. It's a 6-month process to make sure you're at that. So that's really the premise. But my structure right now is teaching the current people how to minister to the young. Because if I just have me do it, there's no way. I mean, you got a class of 30 or 50. You're just never going to be able to really do that. So my current responsibility is similar to what Jesus did it. I minister to the 12, so the 12 can go minister to the world. So that's what we're doing right now. And some of them, because they had certain ways they used to do it, they're like, well, we are doing this. And I said, I think you are trying. I'm just saying it's ineffective. Right. And as we point that out, they're like, we didn't realize that. So that's part of it is trying. So it is structure. I don't like the idea of program because you can't change program easily. Structure evolves as necessary. And so right now we've got a lot of people that we're training, but new people coming in.
I had seen that you had talked about multi-generational, and I wasn't sure if you had read this book or not. Have you had an opportunity to read this yet?
I have not.
I'm going to give that to you as a copy to check out and give it back to me whenever I had a chance to read through that. Okay. It is such a tremendous book. Now, I'm a data guy. I as much as I like relationships, when it comes to broad things, I like data because you can get so subjective if you take your own personal experience and say, this is happening everywhere, right? I mean, tell me how you came to the analysis that that's happening everywhere. And so Tim Elmore takes a lot of surveys and studies and basically goes generation by generation. These are really 5 common generations you were seeing right now, and talks about what is really good is talks about what shaped each generation. And then from what shaped them, here's what you're going to see, large scale, broad strokes. It's not going to apply all the time in each generation. Here's how they're going to approach this. Here's how they're going to approach this. Here's how they approach one another. And so what you begin to get as you read it is so much context. Now, I'm in the middle, right? As this Gen Xer or whatever, I'm right in the middle. So I've got millennials right after me, and then Gen Z after that, and I've got the boomers above me and the builders before that. So in the middle, it's a little bit easier, I think, to see it because I grew up with these guys, and I've done a lot of life with these guys, and so on and so forth. But I think when you're at the extremes, it's harder to see.
Yes, it is.
And so the moment I move either way in this generational ladder, I have so much less context. You'll love it if you like a little bit of data because again, it's gonna inform so well. And I've passed it out to a lot of folks and said, listen, you would understand millennials so much better if you'd read this book, or you'd understand boomers so much better if you'd read this book, because y'all look at the world differently. Here's why you look at the world differently. So yeah, I think you'll like it.
I love that. That's a great tool for even teaching the older generation how to. They want to adapt it. We were just talking in our elder board just about some of the things Gen Z. I'm like, man, Gen Z, they've been at war their entire life. Yep. And they never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Just social media changes. So I love that, dude. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no,
I think it's going to be a great tool.
It is good. What are sources of frustration?
Well, I think for right now in our ministry is people don't know me well. And so sometimes either they make a wrong assumption. Like I was telling my elders the other day, or a couple months ago, like they're so well intended not to tell me what the last guy did because they don't want me to have to copy, but then I'm just skipping things I don't even know we used to do. And I'm like, I know your intention, but you're setting me up here. I mean, let me choose to say no to it. And that was the one. And some of it is they're working so hard to do a fresh start that I'm jumping over hills that I should never have to. And that was the one thing. And I've told them, and I've told our staff that. So I got one guy in my church. He's younger. He's just a member. He makes sure to tell me everything ahead of time. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? You're my best friend. Tell me. I have no problem changing. Just let me know what I'm changing.
Right.
So that's been the one. And I think that one of the things, and it's hard because we're still developing staff, but I like people to inform me what's going on, but I don't like to micromanage. If you've been given a ministry, go. So if I'm spending a lot of time answering a million questions, I'm like, no, I trust you. All right. Now, if you mess up tomorrow, we'll talk about that. But for now, and I think that's, in some of that, you can go too far where the person never tells you anything.
Yeah.
But that's my thing is I want to be able to develop and equip the people around me to just feel comfortable enough. And I will say I'm new. They don't know who I am, especially if there's been a lot of turnover, which there has been. Is it my fault? They don't know what the turnover is coming from. Am I firing people? That's a valid question. So I think that's the thing is, just those unknowns, and it's in part of it for me is we're still getting used to the place.
Yeah.
15
months.
They have history, decades of history with each other. And I still don't remember half the people's last names. So, and that's more of a personal thing. But the church has been very gracious about it. People still come ask me their last name and I just call everybody Smith. And so they laugh. I'm like, listen, I know your first name and I can find your last name. Too, yeah. I can find it in the database. So we're good to go. So.
If you could get your church, your congregation to kind of wrap their arms, their minds around one concept that you think they're kind of struggling with right now, what's the thing you wish they could just, man, here's what I want them to really be able to embrace?
Yeah. I think it's because of tradition, because of the way they did it, COVID added this in. They want to be outreach oriented. They just don't realize how easily isolated they can get into something.
Right.
So their mission, love God, love others, reach the world, they want to do it. I just don't, the tangible aspect of what does that look like in postmodern Christianity. Because a lot of them are talking last night, conversations about ways we did it 30 years ago. And I'm like, you're probably going to offend more people than it's going to work. So I think that's the big thing is they want to do it, but grabbing a hold of the how. Because what we're looking at, a lot of it's brand new. A lot of it's personal. Outreach used to be a church event, which it still is. But I'm really trying to grab a hold of the personal aspect of it. So one of the things that I grew up with, and no one ever said or not, I mean, we knew we should, but it just never happened, was how many unsafe friends do you have?
Yep.
Because I grew up, you're not supposed to.
Right.
So how many unsafe friends do you have that you're wanting to reach and love? Because that's what Jesus did. And a lot of them, it's I guess the way to put it in synopsis is not just doing what church does, but making it personal. This is not the staff. This is not the elders. I can do this. Because I think they want to. I can. So how do I teach it? And then how do I tangibly give them the tools to go do? Because most of them are just afraid. I don't have enough answers. I'm like, you don't have to have, like you said, have them at your table, tell them your story.
Yeah.
And then bring them to church.
Yeah.
And then we'll help you from there.
That's the Philip story.
Yeah.
Can anything good come out of Nazareth? I don't know. Come and see. I got no answer for you.
So I think because I think our church really wants that. And I say that's the one thing that keeps me up, keeps me in prayer. Lord, am I doing enough to teach it tangibly? Because, I've been around church where everything's so theoretical.
Yeah.
But then again, I look back and say, I'm learning stuff as I study and I read. I'm like, how come I didn't, I knew that, but I didn't connect it. I knew this, but I didn't do it. I think it's the best way to put it. So I think just trying to get them the personal that I can do what I want to do. Because when you grab a church that was somewhat older, they're used to theory. And I really want them to, you got a lot of knowledge. And some of the older people are telling me, I feel like we have no purpose. And I get it. We're working on that. We just created a class for it in the fall. What do you do in this season of life? When you're older, you're retired, you don't have the energy to do this. Of course, to me, is invest into the next generation. But how? Don't just disappear. How do you do that? So trying to teach them to embrace the gospel that they love so much. And I think, and some of it is, since COVID, there's just been this standstill.
Yep.
And people keep saying COVID. I'm like, listen, guys, that was 4 years ago. We're in a new, like post 9/11, we're in a different world. That's fine. Then live it.
Well, I told you I kind of did it both ways, too fast, too slow. And so, about 3-4 months after Russ had left, for me, it was like, okay, we have to have a thing to rally around.
Right.
So I'm prayerfully trying to figure out what's the initiative we can all kind of run toward that really helps people when they have a purpose. And so I tried to roll something out. I mean, just felt so flat. Like everyone's just like, yeah, sounds nice, Pastor. Just, and I went, oh gosh, they're not ready. They're still hurting. There's a lot going on. And so try to have kind of a vision thing the next year. Just a total mess. Like really didn't go very. And I go, I don't think we have a heart for it yet.
Right.
And so I think like we're really what we've got to work on for a year or so is like just seeking the Lord, understand like he's enough. And so there was a season, probably the 2 years, and the first year I'm just preaching the tar off the gospel. Man, it needs to change us. It needs to change me. It needs to change you. And so we're going through gentleness and joy, and Jesus is beautiful. And I mean, these kinds of things, and then we're not going anywhere.
Right.
And so one of the elders finally goes, man, we got it. And I was like, nope, not yet. Yeah. And so now I'm the one going, nope, slow down. And he's going, we got it. And I'm nope. So we keep doing it. And then as we're praying, we're seeking the Lord, we're elders are praying. I mean, the church starts to get antsy. And now I'm like, now we're getting there. Now, we got it. And I'm like, okay, why do we have to do something? Well, we got to reach people. Okay, heart has changed.
Yes.
Hey, we got to go. Why? Oh, good. We got to heart has changed. And so it took 2 years of seeking the Lord, preaching the gospel for people to kind of get there. And then, and this is probably one of the better things that God has taught me in the last year, I have no shortage of ideas. Dear Lord. I can't stop, right? What the church didn't need my ideas yet. What they needed to learn how to seek the Lord. Yeah. And so we took 100 leaders, we had them pray and fast for a week, and then we put them in a room together. And we said, listen, we know the general direction God's taking this church.
Right.
Your job is to come up with the specifics. And so we spent about 6 hours in a room together. Brought in some outside people, went through a whole brainstorming, fun, praise, worship, prayer, all kinds of fun stuff, and ended up with some real consensus where you got 100 people that just love the church going, we have to do that. And the beautiful thing is not only have we sought the Lord and the Lord's brought us there, but you have the core of your church is not going to let anybody detract, somebody else in the church go, well, we can't do that. They're going to go, we got to do that, And so that was the galvanizing moment where the core of the church went, we are going to do it, and we're going to pay for it, and we're going to volunteer for it. And we were along for the ride at that point, right? God's moving. We're sitting there going, this is cool, exactly. and then off we went.
Right.
So yeah, I've been too fast. I've been too slow. I've been in the middle.
I found the one thing that, I was told when I came, because when I went to my last senior pastorate, I was the assistant pastor.
Okay.
So I had a million ideas on change, but not new. And they kind of hit it because I was always the assistant pastor to some of them and never got beyond that. But coming here, I was, you got to learn the people and you got to see who's the future and how you build. And that's what we've seen. Similar, you're saying is a younger group that's, some of them have been in this church for 7-8 years. In fact, some of the older people don't even know the younger people's name. And it was like when I came in, there's 3 sections of the church, and each one they were very kind,
siloed,
but they were. And it's just again, it's some COVID did some of that. Some of it's unintentional. So they're like, this person's brand new. I'm like, no, they've been in church for 7 years, and that's part of what I wanted them to catch on. And they're like, they didn't get angry. They're like, wow, So in the last 6 months, some of them are coming. What are we doing here? Were they ready for change?
Yeah.
And the older generation's like, yeah, let's go. So that's why I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm ready to move. Don't go too fast. Don't go too slow. Get the right people, training. So every once in a while, I feel like I'm like a little behind, But the thing is, I love it when God organically's got it set up.
Yeah.
Because I used to try and program it and structure it because, I can make it work. Here's the vision, make it work type thing. And then people were like, hey, Pastor, are you getting what you want? I'm like, well, I didn't teach it well. If they think, am I getting what I want?
Right.
It's very pastor driven. So that's different perspective.
Yeah.
And when I see the leaders coming in, like, we need to do this. That's a big thing.
Well, revival is God pouring out his spirit in this organic, vibrant, unpredictable way. And so it's like, we want revival, but we're gonna program it, and you're like, you can't program revival, right? There's an aspect of seeking God's face and seeking his presence and being desperate for him to show up. And like, you need that not just in your elder room. You need it in your elder room.
Right.
But you need it in your church.
Yeah,
and so trying to teach to the, hey, why we need this so much is like, man, do you want dry religion, or do you want vibrant, God's here moving in crazy ways? I mean, there's a big difference. And so, I mean, we're in a very sweet time in our church, and I want to recognize the fact that it's sweet because it hasn't always been. God's movement is great. It may not always be. It hasn't always been. We're enjoying the fact that it is right now. Wildest dream, man, like 5 to 7 years. Like, what does this thing look like at Grace?
We had a dream. Actually, I heard this idea in college, and when I mentioned it to my elders, they were loving it. And so one of the things we've learned, head of our association stating how many buildings SBC owns, but even that, I've always had a dream to be able to, I'm not huge about getting a mega church. This idea of having 5,000 people on a campus and all that, it just
sounds like a headache.
It really does. But my thought was, what if we got big enough to we could support a guy that's on staff, his entire job, train and go start churches.
Yes.
And we could pay for it.
Yes.
So the goal would be in the next 10, 15 years, can we start and or revitalize some of these churches in Bakersfield? Instead of trying to bring 5,000 people to my campus, what if I revitalized a church like ours in your neighborhood? Yeah. And that's the dream. And it's going to, biggest thing is money. We can get people, but I want to become a church that trains people and sends them out.
Yeah.
Whether that be someone out of ministry that came from college, someone in our church that called to ministry and can help, and even taking a chunk of the church and saying, go with them.
Yeah, I think it's more than money, because I think money comes whenever God wants something. I mean, money's whatever. I think you build up such a culture in your church that leaders are organically being, and there's intentionality to it, but or leaders are organically being trained up in that church. And there's such a heart that there's a discontent to stay. And so if the church begins to change to such an aspect that we're just waiting for the next person we're sending out.
Exactly.
Then I think money, you'll figure the money out. Right?
Well, they'll get behind it. And there's people who can.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is, if you're not careful, your natural tendency is isolationism. And it's not a negative thing. It's just you love your church, you love your people, you love going to church. Yeah. That's great. Who would have thought that the thing you love doing the most can actually make you ineffective? Going to church and fellowshipping with people makes you isolated. It's not a purposeful. It's just you're comfortable.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, people say, I want to be out of the comfort zone. Until they're out of the comfort zone, they're wondering, God, what are you doing?
Let me get back in the comfort zone.
I'm literally doing what you asked. But teaching how people to recognize that, I think, is a big one. And we're beginning that culture. And that's, so that's why I think when I was listening to this guy in his 30 or 40 year tenure at his church, he started 99 churches across the country doing this. And
I'm behind.
They had about $500,000 budget every year. That's all they did. They'd have 3 or 4 people, and he had a whole system. It was really some in the area, some across the country, some in other. But the benefit was these guys went fully supported. They didn't have to get support, so they're not wasting time. And I loved it. But I had to teach my church, to want that and be willing to do that. And so some of it's healthy, some of it's putting that vision out there, and it's organic. And then it's one of the things for us has been stories. We've seen some neat stories in the last year and a half, and we start telling people, don't even realize this. This guy who grew up, he married a pastor's daughter, spent 20 some years in his church, and 3 months after he comes to our church, gets saved. He wasn't saved, he knew it. Gets saved, and now the conversations we're having are awesome. And just some of these stories of how God is doing stuff and healing. And when the church hears that, they realize it's not the programs doing it, God's doing it.
Yeah.
And that's what's exciting to people.
That is exciting.
And of course, now that we're trying to do some renovations, things get more expensive. It's costing more. And some people are panicking. And I'm like, listen, this is what God wanted. God wants us to trust him.
Yeah.
He'll take care of this. We'll pay it all back. Don't worry about it.
Well, being hungry and sensitive to seek God as opposed to just, I've got a plan, allows you to go, okay, I see where God's leading. Now, maybe he gave me a plan for a reason. Maybe it fits, but I'm just, I want to be sensitive where God's leading. And I read I wish I could attribute this quote to the right person. I don't remember who it was, but they said, you want to be about 2 steps in front of your congregation as a pastor, right? Because if you're only a step in front of them, then the church will just be too slow to change and to seek God. And if you're 3 steps in front of them, you're a martyr.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you get too far out in front, they're just like, yep, enough with that guy.
That's a good point.
So there's a tension about 2 steps in front, right? Just about right. So,
yeah.
And I appreciate all the time you gave me.
I appreciate letting me do this.
This was good.
Awesome.
All right. Until next time.
All right.